Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive, where we cut through the noise and get you the essential insights from today's most compelling stories. Today, we're plunging headfirst into something that's really shaking up the global automotive landscape: the incredibly fierce price war currently engulfing China's car industry, especially in the booming new energy vehicle, or NEV sector. This isn't just about a few discounts here and there. It's a profound systemic issue. Our analysis reveals it's a classic case of what's termed involuted competition, and it's affecting everyone involved. It's a crucial concept, really, to get a handle on if we want to understand the full picture.
That's exactly right. When we talk about involuted competition, or 内环竞争, as it's known in China, we're talking about a self-defeating competitive dynamic. Imagine a group of people trapped in a shrinking box, right? All fighting desperately for the same limited space. Instead of trying to, grow the box or maybe find new ones entirely, they just push harder and harder against each other. And this often harms the entire ecosystem, not just their direct rivals. It leads to this relentless race to the bottom that can become incredibly destructive. Understanding this concept is absolutely key to unlocking what's happening right now.
That's a powerful framework. So, our mission today is to cut through all the headlines, really dig deep into the origins of this involuted competition. We need to analyze its current, frankly alarming state and explore its far reaching consequences. We'll try to uncover who truly benefits and, perhaps more importantly, who definitely doesn't. What's fundamentally causing this downward spiral? And crucially, what paths can Chinese auto companies possibly take to escape this cycle before it's too late?
And it will also provide some vital historical context. We can draw parallels and also contrasts with previous price wars in the auto industry, both in China and globally. We'll consider the critical and frankly evolving role of regulators and the powerful market dynamics that are shaping this landscape right now. By the end of this deep dive, you'll hopefully have a comprehensive understanding of why this moment is so pivotal for China's car industry and, what it might mean for the global auto market as a whole. It's a story of intense struggle, innovation, and a desperate search for a new way forward.
The alarming state of China's auto price war.
So let's start by defining what this unregulated price war really means for all the players caught in its grip. You mentioned it's a typical manifestation of involuted competition. What's the core paradox here?
Yeah, the core insight is pretty stark. In this involuted competition, it's basically a lose-lose scenario. It means no one truly benefits in the long run. Imagine a zero-sum game where even the supposed winners are left exhausted and, crucially, unprofitable. That's the fundamental takeaway for everyone involved, from the largest manufacturers of the whole vehicles, who are obviously facing immense pressure, to the upstream suppliers providing thousands of parts for each car, the downstream dealerships, the 4S stores handling sales, service, parts, surveys, and even, maybe surprisingly, you, the consumer. While you might initially cheer for lower prices, the core message from industry leaders is crystal clear. Chinese car companies absolutely must escape this low price model. They need to build a new competitive landscape, one driven by technology, superior value, and genuine collaboration across the entire supply chain. This isn't just a minor tweak, it's a crucial, almost existential shift in their whole mindset.
It certainly feels like this price war just exploded onto the scene, creating immediate shockwaves. But how long has this kind of intense pressure really been building? Was it sudden?
That's a good question, because no, it wasn't really sudden. This intense period of price cuts actually began, maybe more quietly, back in 2022 with Tesla's initial price reductions. Since then, over the past 3 years, we've seen four distinct rounds of increasingly aggressive price wars. And honestly, there are absolutely no signs of it stopping on its own. What's fascinating, though, is that despite this relentless, intense competition, the Chinese auto industry has actually grown in sheer scale. But this growth has come at a significant cost. It's led to considerable differentiation, and unfortunately, many new energy vehicle brands are now, teetering on the edge of survival. They're struggling immensely to maintain any profitability at all.
Given that grim picture for so many brands, what specifically happened in May 2025 that led Chinese regulators to step in so directly? That really speaks volumes about how serious things got, doesn't it?
It was indeed a direct and, frankly, unprecedented intervention. On May 31st, 2025, the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, or CAM, they openly stated that leading car companies had initiated drastic price cuts, and these cuts caused widespread panic across the NEV market. On the very same day, China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, MIA, announced increased efforts to rectify involuted competition. They reiterated a stark warning: unregulated price wars have no winners and no future. This was far from a gentle suggestion. It signaled serious, high-level concern right from the top.
So the government isn't just saying stop competing altogether. They're saying stop competing unfairly. That's a really crucial distinction, right?
Yeah. Precisely. The intervention was specifically aimed at correcting and halting these involuted, unregulated price wars because they're seen as detrimental, actively harmful to healthy industry development. However, other forms of price competition, the ones considered healthy, may be driven by efficiency gains or innovation. Those are seen as a natural factor in accelerating industry differentiation, weeding out weaker players. Those are still very much ongoing. And this brings us to a fundamental point. What exactly separates an ordered price war from an unregulated one in the eyes of these regulators? It's a critical distinction they're trying to enforce now.
Okay, let's put this in context. Are price wars a totally new thing in the Chinese auto industry, or have we seen this kind of intense competition before?
Oh, price wars are certainly not new to China's auto industry. We can look back to 2002, for example. Back then, SAIC GM's sale sedan triggered what was considered an unprecedented but ultimately ordered price war. They did this by creating the very popular sub 100,000 RMB family car segment. That particular price war actually helped make joint venture cars accessible to ordinary Chinese families on a massive scale. It drove widespread adoption and market growth. So you could argue it was a beneficial shakeup.
And how does that historical example compare to what Tesla kicked off back in 2022? Was it a similar kind of dynamic?
Tesla's NEV price war had a different, but you could argue equally transformative, effect. It really empowered Chinese brands who were armed with new electric and intelligent technologies, plus significant brand and experience upgrades. It allowed them to truly leverage their product strength. They effectively squeezed out what our analysis calls the excessive profit bubbles of the joint venture brands and even some luxury brands. It prevented them from making easy money in China like they used to. And critically, this initial phase of competition significantly expanded the market share of Chinese brands. So in many ways, you could view the early stages of the NEV price war as an ordered competitive phase, maybe similar in effect to the sale, but driven much more by technology and innovation this time.
So if price wars can actually be good for the market and for consumers sometimes, what made this latest one in May 2025 different? Why was it so problematic that it needed direct government intervention? It sounds like it crossed some kind of line.
It did indeed cross a line. The key distinction, according to economists and industry analysts, is whether the price war is truly ordered. An ordered price war is one where companies participate, let's say, voluntarily, driven primarily by significant cost reductions. Reductions stemming from genuine technological revolutions or real management innovations. This kind of price war is necessary, even beneficial, because it washes out weaker players, increases industry concentration, and ultimately rewards good products and well-managed companies with larger market shares. The May 2025 NEV price war, however, was different. Its depth, breadth, and intensity reached a new critical point. An increasing number of models and brands were cutting prices so aggressively, so deeply, that almost no company could avoid its massive damaging impact. It moved beyond healthy competition into something far more destructive, risking the entire industry's health and stability.
You mentioned companies being on the brink of survival. Can you give us some real-world examples? What illustrates the consequences of this intense price cutting?
Yeah, a stark example that really brings this home is NIDA Auto. Believe it or not, NIDA was actually an NEV sales leader back in 2022. But now they're reportedly facing bankruptcy and are considered unlikely to survive. This isn't just a rumor, it's a significant indicator of the severity. And many other brands, we're told, are simply gritting their teeth and holding on, just trying to survive day by day. This comes at an incredibly high cost. The whole vehicle manufacturers are pulling their suppliers and even local governments into what's being described as a high-risk gamble. Historically, suppliers rise and fall with the OEMs they supply, right? But now local governments are discovering that companies they've supported, maybe through subsidies or incentives, are becoming weaker and more unprofitable, and this directly impacts regional tax revenues from the entire supply chain, creating a systemic financial drain. It's a ripple effect.
And what about you, the consumer? We often think, great, price wars mean cheaper cars. But you've hinted there's a significant downside here, too.
Right. While the initial price tag is undeniably attractive, our analysis reveals two major hidden costs for you. First, there's the significant risk of decreased quality. One R&D head from an independent brand candidly told Beijing magazine that unseen places are conscience engineering. What that implies is that the quality of components you can't see, like internal wiring, hidden structural elements, maybe cheaper seals or something, that's where companies might cut corners to reduce costs. This can lead to shorter vehicle lifespans and significantly higher long-term maintenance costs down the road for you. You might pay less up front, but definitely more over time.
Okay, what's being done to address that specific concern about quality, especially with these potentially hidden compromises?
Thankfully, regulators are indeed addressing this directly. On June 9th, MIT announced consistency supervision checks. They're specifically focusing on models with high public attention and those perceived to have significant quality or safety risks. This includes verifying fundamental aspects like the vehicle structure, its frontal crash performance, and crucially, EV safety requirements like battery integrity. For any products found to have issues, the consequences will be severe, including public condemnation and other penalties. This is a critical step towards protecting you, the consumer. The second hidden cost for you is the sheer anxiety around buying and using the car. Recently, there have been multiple landmine incidents, as they call them, with car dealerships collapsing, suddenly going bankrupt. The dealers blame sudden policy changes from manufacturers and also banks' unwillingness to lend. This leads to severe funding shortages and an inability to provide crucial after-sales service. We've even seen shocking cases where dealerships literally absconded with vehicle certificates, leaving buyers who had fully paid for their cars completely unable to take delivery. This utterly undermines trust in the entire buying process, leaving consumers in a very vulnerable and uncertain position.
So the deal isn't nearly as good as it looks if the after-sales service disappears or the fundamental quality is questionable. The perceived value just evaporates, right?
Precisely. As Kui Dongshu from the China Passenger Car Association, or CPCA, notes, these unregulated price wars negatively impact after-sales service. They undermine dealer rights, and they destabilize the entire distribution system. They actively hinder healthy industry development, and ultimately, they directly harm consumer interests. It really is a lose-lose situation in the long run.
So what does this all mean for the industry's future if this continues unchecked? What's the bigger economic picture here?
Well, according to MIT and CAM, this is precisely an unregulated price war and a typical manifestation of involuted competition, a situation where dominant firms might try to monopolize the market, squeeze out competitors, and harm their legitimate rights. They've even called it a suicidal price war. If it's left unchecked, it could significantly impact the entire auto industry, which is a pillar sector, remember. It contributes something like 10% of China's national tax revenue. That's a huge slice of the economic pie potentially at risk, representing a significant threat to national economic stability if it goes wrong.
Has the situation improved at all since that very public intervention back in May? Or is it still just a relentless downward spiral?
The reality, our analysis indicates, is more complex than a simple yes or no. While those initial really aggressive cuts were indeed intervened upon, the underlying competitive pressure absolutely remains. It didn't just disappear. However, there has been a significant positive development. In June 2025, several major Chinese automakers publicly committed to 60-day payment terms for their suppliers. Now, this is a direct and encouraging response to the problematic lengthening of payment periods. That practice had allowed some car companies, the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, to essentially fund their price cuts by taking what amounted to interest-free debt from their own supply chain. So that this move represents a tangible step towards correcting some of the visible issues, like maybe false advertising, malicious smear campaigns against competitors, and the immense supply chain risks that stem from these unregulated price wars. It's a crucial push for the industry to, set things right and maybe instill a more ethical framework for competition. And this brings us to a fundamental question, really. Is the current price war driven by genuine innovation and profound cost reduction? Like, for instance, Henry Ford's Model T back in 1913. That car saw prices drop from $850 to $260 because of radical production efficiency gains, making quality cars affordable for the first time. A real step change. Or is it merely a zero-sum game driven primarily by overcapacity and short-term demand, where companies just try to outcut each other to grab a fleeting market share? Our sources strongly argue that right now it's mostly the latter. It lacks sustainable, innovation-driven momentum. The key, they suggest, is for Chinese auto companies to move beyond this quagmire, this mess, and focus instead on technology, strategic globalization, efficient management, and precise market positioning. That's the real escape route.
Unpacking the root causes. A deep dive into inventory and overcapacity.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the symptoms of this aggressive price war. Now let's explore the core problem. What's fundamentally driving this intense competition and the downward spiral we're seeing?
Well, the direct trigger, as our sources point out pretty clearly, is a significant and persistent increase in vehicle inventory. Think of it like a giant warehouse that's simply overflowing with cars. It creates immense pressure to sell right. At the end of the first quarter of 2025, the inventory held by listed Chinese car companies reached a near 10-year peak. Some firms were holding over a staggering 100 billion RMB in stock, just sitting there. To give you some perspective, that's roughly 13.7 billion US dollars. By the end of April 2025, the national passenger car inventory hit a new high for that specific month, reaching an enormous 3.5 million vehicles. This isn't just a minor surplus. It's a massive, industry-wide accumulation of unsold cars.
Wow, that is a lot of cars sitting around. So, who are the biggest players contributing to this inventory buildup, and how does it compare to some of the global automotive giants? Is everyone facing this?
The data is quite striking. From 2015 to 2024, the inventory of comparable listed automakers in China soared by 2.6 times. It went from about 86.45 billion RMB up to 314.47 billion RMB. That's roughly 43 billion US dollars. And this trend continued to grow in the first quarter of 2025, increasing by another 63.47 billion RMB, or about 8.7 billion US dollars. Looking at specific companies, BYD, SIA Group, and Great Wall Motor are the top three in terms of inventory size. BYD alone holds a colossal 154.37 billion RMB in inventory, which is over 21 billion US dollars. Now, while these figures are undeniably large, it's important to keep in mind they are relative to the company's own vast total assets. That helps put them in perspective, at least somewhat. Now, how does this compare internationally? Most major international car makers like VW, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW, they also have inventories exceeding that 100 billion RMB mark. So it indicates a common industry challenge globally to some extent. However, Tesla really stands out here. For nearly a decade, Tesla has consistently kept its inventory below this 100 billion RMB mark. This significant difference highlights varying strategies, doesn't it?
Chinese companies have been expanding rapidly, aggressively to grab market share. This often leads to what our sources call passive inventory growth, where production just outpaces immediate demand. In contrast, companies like Tesla often adopt more precise order-to-production models, keeping their stock levels much lower. And this difference raises an important question about the sustainability of China's current aggressive expansion strategy, especially as the domestic market starts to look saturated.
So, what specifically is driving this huge increase in inventory for Delhi's car makers? It sounds like more than just sales not keeping up, maybe an aggressive push from the supply side itself.
You're hitting on a key point there. A significant contributing factor is the accelerated pace of production capacity expansion, particularly since 2024. This isn't just about the overall increase in total vehicle production. It's heavily influenced by the new energy vehicle sector, the NEV boom. In 2024, China's total auto production and sales grew by 3.7% and 4.5% respectively. Okay, decent growth. But NEV saw much higher growth, 34.4% for production and 35.5% for sales. Huge numbers. And this trend only accelerated in the first quarter of 2025, with NEV production and sales surging by over 50% and 47% respectively. So this aggressive capacity buildup is meeting a market that simply cannot fully absorb it, leading directly to the pileup of cars we see in inventory. It's a classic case of supply dramatically outpacing demand.
So, with all this massive production coming online causing this inventory glut, did the price war actually help? Did it move some of these cars off the lots in the short term? Was it effective at all in that sense?
Yes, it was, at least in the short term. The May 2025 sales data confirms that the strategy of trading price for volume did, in fact, work immediately. Total auto sales in May increased by 11.2% year-on-year. Leading companies like Geely and Changan saw their retail sales jump significantly, over 65% for Geely, 41% for Changan. And even BYD, already a giant, was up by 9.2%. This clearly demonstrates that consumers do respond to lower prices and aggressive promotions. No surprise there.
But is this a sustainable strategy for the long run, or is it just a temporary fix, maybe even one that creates more problems down the line?
Our analysis casts significant doubt on its long-term sustainability. If you look back at the first half of 2024, for instance, frequent and deep price cuts ultimately didn't achieve the expected long-term growth effect. It really appears to be a short-term fix that, while it moves cars in the moment, can have severe, even detrimental long-term consequences for the companies involved and the industry as a whole. It's like using a painkiller for a chronic illness, isn't it? It might relieve the immediate symptom, the inventory, but it doesn't cure the underlying problem of overcapacity or squeezed margins.
What's the direct financial impact of this price for volume strategy on the companies themselves? Are they still making any money, or are profits just evaporating in this fight?
The profit margins are being severely compressed. In 2024, the auto industry's overall profit margin was just 4.3%. Now, that's already lower than the average 6% for downstream industrial enterprises. But even more concerned, in the first quarter of 2025, it dropped further to a mere 3.9%. That means for every 100 RMB of revenue, car companies are only keeping a tiny 3.9 RMB as profit. That's a razor-thin margin to operate on, especially in a capital-intensive industry like automotive manufacturing. It leaves almost no room for error, no room for reinvestment, or for weathering unexpected market shifts.
That's an incredibly tiny margin. Are specific companies feeling this pressure more acutely than others, perhaps those that expanded too aggressively?
Absolutely. Our sources highlight several leading automakers experiencing massive declines in their financials. GC Group, for example, saw its 2024 revenue drop by almost 17%, and its net profit attributable to shareholders plummeted by a staggering 81%. 81%. Its gross margin was a tiny 2.26%, and its net margin was actually negative, meaning it was losing money overall on its operations. SAAT Group faced similar challenges, revenue down over 17.6%, net profit down 88%. This level of financial distress, directly driven by the relentless price wars, is simply unsustainable for any business, let alone a major industrial player. These companies are essentially burning through cash just to maintain market share.
So, what's the overall cost of this price war to the entire market? Beyond just individual company profits, what's the collective hit?
The China Automobile Dealers Association, or CATA, they estimated that from January to November 2024 alone, just that period, the price war led to a cumulative loss of 177.6 billion RMB in the new car market. That's approximately 24.4 billion US dollars. Gone. This isn't just about profit erosion for the manufacturers. It's a significant drain on the industry's overall health and vitality. It's a huge economic cost for pushing prices down so aggressively, affecting the entire value chain and potentially long-term investment.
So, what's the ultimate takeaway here for companies that are grappling with this relentless pressure to sell and the accompanying inventory buildup? What's the message from the industry itself?
CATA's president, Xiao Zhengshan, stated it pretty bluntly in June 2025. He said the industry must shift from a scale-driven production model to a demand-driven one. The current oversupply fundamentally means the old produce-to-sell model, just building cars and hoping they sell, is obsolete. It doesn't work anymore. This transition isn't just a response to the current crisis. It's seen as a prerequisite for the auto industry to achieve high-quality development in the long run. The ongoing inventory pressure, the relentless price wars, the squeezed profits, all these are forcing companies to adopt more lean inventory management and serious supply chain optimization just to improve profitability. This, our analysis suggests, is a crucial area for future growth and sustainability, moving away from simply chasing bigger production numbers towards smarter, more demand-focused operations.
Who's really paying the price? The victims of unregulated competition.
Okay, when companies are locked in this intense, almost brutal competition, this mud wrestling match, as some sources put it, who are the first ones to really feel the brunt of it? Who gets dirty first?
Well, the whole vehicle manufacturers themselves, the OEMs, are indeed primary victims in many ways. The relentless focus on cutting prices just erodes their profits. We're seeing widespread losses, especially among the intelligent electric vehicle companies, the newer players. It really is a race to the bottom where everyone gets hurt, not just the weakest players. It's a zero-sum game within their own tier where any market share gains come at the direct expense of profitability.
And what about the human cost within these companies? What's happening to the employees, the people trying to keep these operations running under such intense pressure?
Our sources paint a really stark picture here. There's immense pressure on employees, leading to severe overtime. This goes beyond the already grueling 996 model, working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, to what's now being tragically, maybe cynically, called DISO 7. That implies nonstop work, midnight to midnight, 7 days a week. Imagine the sheer exhaustion, the human toll this relentless pace demands. Cost reduction and rapid car delivery become the absolute paramount goals for every single department, every employee. This leads to widespread burnout, and you have to worry, potential compromises in long-term quality and maybe even innovation. How creative can you be when you're exhausted?
And what about the pursuit of sales at any cost? Are companies taking ethical shortcuts or engaging in risky behaviors just to move units off the lots?
This relentless pressure absolutely leads to companies taking short-sighted actions that significantly amplify risks and can damage their long-term prospects. We've seen some pretty outrageous advertising tactics, for instance, blurring the lines between assisted driving and fully autonomous driving. There were headlines about drivers sleeping while the car supposedly safely reaches its destination, being used as a selling point. Extremely risky. Car designs have also become, well, self-indulgent in some cases. We saw bizarre door handles that incredibly hinder rescue personnel from opening doors in an emergency because they can't be easily found or operated from the outside. These actions have already led to safety incidents and significant public backlash, damaging brand image and consumer trust. Regulators have had to step in, specifically warning against misleading intelligent driving claims and mandating door handle designs that don't impede rescue efforts. It's telling that BYD's chairman, Wang Chuanfu, publicly supported these new regulations, emphasizing that safety must always come first. That shows you the level of concern even within the industry.
You mentioned earlier that you, the consumer, aren't the ultimate beneficiaries of this price war, which seems counterintuitive. How so? From our perspective, getting cheaper cars sounds like a definite win.
Right, it seems that way initially. But while the initial price tag is undeniably attractive, our sources reveal there are two major hidden costs for you. First, as we touched on, there's the risk of decreased quality. Remember that quote, unseen places are conscience engineering. This means the quality of components, you can't easily see internal wiring, hidden structural elements, maybe cheaper materials in the chassis. That's where companies might cut corners to save money. And this can lead to shorter vehicle lifespans and significantly higher long-term maintenance costs down the road for you. You pay less up front, maybe, but could end up paying a lot more over time due to repairs and premature wear and tear.
That's a really concerning thought. What's being done to address that specific worry about quality, especially with these potentially hidden compromises?
Yeah, thankfully, regulators are indeed addressing this directly. On June 9th, MIT announced these consistency supervision checks we mentioned. They're specifically focusing on models getting a lot of public attention or those with perceived significant quality or safety risks. This includes verifying fundamental aspects like vehicle structure, frontal crash performance, and crucial EV safety requirements. For any products found to have issues, the consequences will be severe. Public condemnation, potentially recalls, other penalties. This is a critical step towards protecting you and ensuring that cheaper doesn't automatically mean less safe or reliable. The second hidden cost for consumers is the sheer anxiety around buying and using the car. Recently, there have been multiple landmine incidents with car dealerships collapsing, just shutting down. Dealers blame sudden policy changes from manufacturers and also banks becoming unwilling to lend them money. This leads to severe funding shortages and an inability for them to provide crucial after-sales service. What happens if your local dealer just vanishes? We've even seen shocking cases where dealerships literally absconded with vehicle certificates, leaving buyers who had paid in full completely unable to take delivery of their cars. This utterly undermines trust in the entire buying process, leaving consumers feeling very vulnerable and uncertain. You might get a good upfront price, but what happens next?
So yeah, the initial deal on the car isn't nearly as good as it seems if the after-sales service disappears or the fundamental quality is compromised down the line. The perceived value just erodes quickly, leading to buyer's remorse and a serious breakdown of trust.
Precisely. As Kui Dongshu from the CPCA notes, these unregulated price wars negatively impact after-sales service, they undermine dealer rights, and they destabilize the entire distribution system. They actively hinder healthy industry development, and ultimately, they directly harm consumer interests. It really is a lose-lose situation when you look at the bigger picture.
Okay, if the OEMs, the car manufacturers themselves, are getting squeezed so hard, where does that pressure go next in the chain? Who bears the brunt after the primary manufacturers?
The auto parts suppliers are perhaps the most severely impacted group in this entire dynamic. It really flows downhill. Think about it. A car has over 20,000 parts, right? And a massive 60% of the value of those parts is sourced from upstream suppliers. So when OEMs need to slash costs to fuel their price wars, they inevitably squeeze every possible penny from their suppliers. Now, annual price reductions are kind of an industry norm, a yearly negotiation, but suppliers are now complaining that the frequency and the magnitude of these cuts are far too high. And the reasons given are often arbitrary, especially for the small and medium-sized suppliers who have very little leverage in negotiations. They often have no choice but to absorb the pressure.
How exactly do car companies exert this pressure? Are there specific tactics they use that are particularly damaging to their suppliers?
The tactics are diverse and often deeply unfair, according to our sources. Some OEMs simply demand fixed annual cost reductions, but make the percentages arbitrarily large and non-negotiable, leaving suppliers no wiggle room, no way to argue about their own rising costs. Others will sign orders, get the parts delivered, then find flimsy excuses later on to deduct final payments, essentially changing the terms after the fact. And many simply drag out payment periods for an incredibly long time, sometimes well over 6 months. They're essentially using their suppliers as free, interest-free banks to manage their own cash flow. A supplier shared a very telling complaint with caging. They demand car-grade product but offer consumer-grade prices. It's an impossible ask, isn't it? Especially in mature manufacturing sectors where the space for genuine cost-cutting is minimal and prices are almost transparent due to established processes and competition among suppliers. Yet the pressure for continuous, aggressive cost reduction cascades down the entire supply chain, from the big Tier 1 suppliers all the way down to the smallest subcomponent manufacturers. Every layer feels the squeeze, and eventually something has to give, often quality or innovation.
Are there any outright unethical practices at play in this intense environment? Anything that truly undermines the long-term health of the supplier ecosystem?
Disturbingly, yes. Some OEMs are reportedly engaging in highly unethical practices. For instance, they might take a technical solution developed by one supplier, let's call them supplier A, maybe after getting detailed plans or prototypes, and then they hand that solution over to another supplier, supplier B. Supplier B, having incurred zero R&D costs for that specific solution, can then offer a much lower price. The OEM then intentionally reduces orders from supplier A, effectively punishing the innovator who invested in the research and development in the first place. This deeply undermines innovation and fair competition throughout the industry. Why invest in R&D if your solution might just get handed to a competitor? Cheng Peng, the CEO of Waze here, noted that collaborating with OEMs these days feels like betting. OEMs often don't pay R&D fees up front, forcing suppliers to self-fund their development efforts. If the car model using their part sells well, great, it pays off. But if it flops or the project gets canceled midway, the supplier loses heavily, having absorbed all the upfront risk and cost. It's a high-stakes gamble for suppliers with very little control over the outcome.
What's the financial impact on these suppliers when they're under this kind of relentless pressure and these unfair practices? How does it hit their bottom line?
Well, suppliers typically have large investment scales, factories, specialized equipment. They need steady cash flow to operate and reinvest. The exceptionally long payment terms we mentioned, averaging 182 days for auto companies in China, which is nearly double international standards, force them to borrow money just to operate their businesses day to day. This leads to high debt levels and significant capital costs, making their cash flow extremely fragile. One hiccup and they could be in serious trouble. And to make matters worse, OEMs sometimes pay with commercial bills instead of cash. This further elongates the payment cycles. It can take up to 3 months just for the bill to be confirmed, plus another 6 months for the bill itself to mature before they get paid. Suppliers who desperately need cash quickly often have no choice but to sell these bills on the secondary market at a discount, typically 5% to 8%. This further erodes their already thin margins. This system of delayed and discounted payments essentially turns suppliers into reluctant, unsecured, interest-free lenders to the giant OEMs, forcing them to borrow money at interest just to keep their own operations afloat. It's a massive cash flow burden pushed down the chain, and this severe pressure has a much broader impact on the industry's future innovation. One investor, focused specifically on the transportation supply chain, noted that there's very little motivation left to invest in auto innovation companies right now. Why? Because the entire industry isn't making money. The fundamental commercial logic is broken, as they put it. Suppliers are often forced to take loss-making orders just to keep their factories running, just to pay their workers, hoping they can somehow endure until competitors fall. This paints a truly brutal picture of the competitive environment, doesn't it? Where survival is the only goal, even if it means losing money on every part you make.
Price war, a necessary evil or a dangerous trap? Legal and market perspectives.
Okay, we've talked about all the pain and the negative consequences for various players, but is there an argument to be made that price wars are simply a harsh but maybe necessary part of market evolution? Perhaps a cleansing process that, while painful, ultimately strengthens the industry in the long run?
You're right to ask that. Absolutely, there is that argument. Price wars are a common strategy across many consumer goods industries, right? From phones to home appliances to cars, they're used to gain market share, clear excess inventory, suppress rivals, maybe stimulate demand during a downturn. Ultimately, they drive industry reshuffling and consolidation. When markets become saturated, when technology converges to a similar level across competitors, and when production capacity is abundant, which sounds a lot like China's auto market right now, price naturally becomes a primary competitive tool. Roland Berger's global senior partner, Zheng Yun, notes that after 5 to 7 years of intense competition in China's NEV space, product competitiveness in key areas like EV powertrains, smart driving systems, interior design, it's become very similar across many brands. In such a landscape, price naturally emerges as the main lever, maybe the only lever for some, for securing market share.
So it sounds like China's auto industry is just going through a natural shuffling period, maybe similar to what other mature industries have experienced on their path to consolidation, a painful but normal transition.
Yes, it certainly appears to be going through a major consolidation phase. And a key underlying factor here is structural overcapacity. UBS estimates that while Chinese brands' capacity utilization actually rose from 65% to 84% between 2020 and 2024, which is quite efficient, foreign brands' utilization simultaneously fell dramatically from 73% down to just 56%. This indicates that there are approximately 10 million units of redundant capacity, mostly from older joint venture or foreign brand factories, that need to be cut or repurposed. It's a huge overhang. Overall, the auto industry's capacity utilization, which was 71.9% in the first quarter of 2025, is lower than the general industrial average in China, and it has shown significant volatility over recent years. This persistent oversupply creates an environment ripe for aggressive price cuts as companies desperately try to move their inventory and utilize their factories.
This definitely sounds like a shakeout is inevitable then. If there's that much excess capacity floating around, some companies simply won't survive this period.
Indeed. Former MIT Vice Minister Su Bo stated it quite clearly back in March 2025. He said the decline in internal combustion engine, or ICE, vehicle production and profitability has led to vast idle capacity. Many companies, he noted, are now facing life-or-death challenges, with some already ceasing production or even going bankrupt. This confirms the severity of the overcapacity issue, particularly for legacy automakers. And Geely chairman Li Shufu further confirmed this trend in June 2025. He publicly announced that Geely will no longer build new auto plants in China. Instead, they plan to leverage global excess capacity through cooperation and resource restructuring. That signals a major strategic shift away from unchecked domestic expansion towards more efficient resource allocation, maybe even acquiring struggling competitors' assets.
How does China's market concentration play into this intense competitive environment? Is it a case where a few dominant players are trying to squeeze everyone else out, or is it more fragmented?
That's a key point. Compared to highly concentrated markets like the US, Europe, or Japan, where the top 5 automakers often hold over 60% of the global market share, China's market is considerably less concentrated. In 2024, for example, the top 3 companies in China held only about 36.2% of the market share. The top 5 held about 53.1%. This means there's fierce competition among a much larger number of players. Even the market leaders, like BYD, can't afford to just lie flat and relax. They must engage in price wars to maintain their position and continue their growth trajectory. And for the weaker firms, aggressive pricing often becomes their only leverage, their only tool for survival. This dynamic inevitably leads to weaker brands exiting the market, which we're already seeing with names like Neza, GU, and Rising Auto struggling or potentially disappearing. Meanwhile, leading brands like BYD are solidifying what the sources call a one super mini strong market structure. It's a crowded field where everyone is fighting tooth and nail for space.
But when does a normal, maybe even healthy price war cross the line and become unregulated and problematic enough to warrant government intervention? Where's the legal boundary? What makes it malicious?
The distinction is absolutely critical, and it's what the regulators are focused on. While price wars are a natural market mechanism, they become unregulated or malicious when they devolve into competition that actively erodes the industry's foundations. This happens when they start to deplete companies' fundamental capital, pushing them towards insolvency. For instance, in 2024, 16 major listed Chinese automakers saw their net liquid assets, their readily available cash drop by a staggering 62% from their peak in the first half of 2021. 62%. This rapid cash burn creates severe liquidity risks, and as one analyst grimly notes, some companies will die from liquidity crisis. They'll just run out of money. From an industry perspective, malicious competition includes things like using inferior materials to cut costs, actively squeezing suppliers and dealers to the breaking point just to sustain operations, and dumping products below cost specifically to suppress competitors and drive them out of business. These actions collectively harm the entire ecosystem, stifle innovation, and move beyond healthy competition into truly destructive practices. That's the line regulators are trying to police.
So this unregulated price war isn't just bad for business in a strategic sense. It's actually crossing into territory that specific laws in China are designed to prevent.
Exactly. The strong emphasis by CM and MI on enforcing fair competition strongly suggests that these unregulated price wars may indeed be crossing legal lines. China has several laws governing fair competition, including the anti-monopoly law, the anti-unfair competition law, and the price law. These are the legal frameworks being brought to bear on the situation now.
Are companies engaging in actual monopolies then? Using this price war to drive competitors out unfairly in a way that violates anti-monopoly statutes?
Professor Liu Liming from Beijing Gongshan University believes that given the current intensity of price competition among many players, no single car company currently possesses a dominant market position in the legal sense. Therefore, abuse of dominant position, which is a key part of anti-monopoly law, is unlikely to be the main issue at this stage. Also, while there might be speculation sometimes about price alliances or cartels among companies, the reality is that current car prices are falling dramatically, not rising. This doesn't fit the typical definition of a price-fixing agreement, which is usually aimed at artificially raising prices. So, the direct anti-monopoly concerns around pricing itself aren't currently the primary legal issue being addressed by regulators.
Okay, so if not traditional anti-monopoly concerns, what other legal risks are companies facing because of this price war? What specific actions could actually be illegal under other laws?
Deng Zisong, a senior partner at Dasheng law firm, points out a key risk under China's price law. He notes that if car companies sell below cost to exclude competitors or monopolize the market, disrupt normal production and operation order, and harm state interests or other operators' legitimate rights, they could be violating Article 14 of that law. That article specifically prohibits selling products below cost with the intent to gain an unfair market advantage or harm competitors. Penalties for such a violation can be severe, including fines up to 5 times the illegal gain, a forced suspension of business operations, or even, in extreme cases, the revocation of their business license. That's a significant deterrent if enforced. Another crucial area of legal risk lies in the relationship between the powerful OEMs and their often much smaller suppliers and dealers. Zhu Mingyan, a senior partner at Landy Law Firm, highlights that if car companies leverage their dominant position to shift cash flow pressure unfairly onto downstream suppliers or dealers. For example, by forcing dealers to pay for cars up front long before they can sell them, or pushing excessive inventory onto 4S stores that they can't possibly move quickly. This could be considered a form of vertical restraint on competition. Now, while current anti-monopoly and anti-unfair competition laws don't explicitly cover this concept of abuse of relative advantage, a proposed amendment to the anti-unfair competition law, which was in draft revision back in December 2024, includes a new provision, Article 15. This provision would explicitly prohibit large enterprises from abusing their advantages like capital, technology, or market influence to impose unreasonable payment terms or force exclusive agreements on smaller businesses. If this amendment passes and is enforced, certain common OEM behaviors that are currently squeezing suppliers and dealers could indeed become explicitly illegal, providing more legal recourse for those smaller players.
And what about all the aggressive, sometimes clearly misleading marketing we've seen popping up? That seems absolutely rife with potential legal problems.
That's another major legal minefield, absolutely. The intense pressure of the price war has unfortunately led to widespread false advertising. This includes things like misleading discounts, buy now, price drops next week, exaggerating technology and performance capabilities, like those autonomous driving claims, misrepresenting vehicle configurations and quality, faking sales data to look more popular, and even maliciously slandering competitors, spreading rumors or false information. These deceptive practices, all aimed at misleading consumers and gaining an unfair advantage, can violate multiple laws simultaneously. This includes the anti-unfair competition law, the advertising law, and the consumer rights protection law. Companies found to be engaging in such practices would face penalties, potentially large fines, and be legally required to cease their illegal activities and issue corrections. This really raises an important question for you, the listener, doesn't it? How do you discern truth from aggressive marketing hyperbole in such an incredibly competitive and often cutthroat market, where everyone is trying to shout the loudest and bend the truth? It's tough.
Charting a course forward. Escaping the involuted competition trap.
Wow, okay, this seems like a really deep hole the industry has dug itself into.
Yeah.
How do they even begin to climb out? What's the very first step toward a healthier, more sustainable competitive landscape? Where do they start?
Our sources outline 3 major strategic paths for the industry to try and escape this trap. The first, and probably the most foundational step, is to rely on legal frameworks and regulations to standardize competition, make the rules clearer, and enforce them. Deng Zisong, the lawyer we mentioned, suggests that leveraging the price law, particularly the provisions against below-cost selling with malicious intent and existing industry regulations, is absolutely crucial. Beyond that, there's a clear need to improve industrial policies and rigorously implement fair competition review systems to create effective, truly binding constraints on behavior across the board. And if that abuse of relative advantage clause we discuss is integrated into the anti-unfair competition law, we can definitely expect to see a significant reduction in instances where dealers or suppliers are forced into unreasonable trade conditions by powerful manufacturers. This provides a clearer legal line for what's acceptable and what's not.
What should regulators focus on specifically to make this work, to ensure that the rules are being applied effectively and actually changing behavior?
Professor Lou Laming emphasizes that the relevant government departments and the industry associations must clearly define their regulatory priorities. They can't police everything at once. The focus, he states, should primarily be on curbing the car companies' excessive demands and profit encroachment on their upstream and downstream partners, the suppliers and dealers who are getting squeezed the hardest. They also need to pay incredibly close attention to potential safety and quality degradation that might result from the relentless pressure of price cuts. You can't let safety slip in the race for lower prices. So it's about protecting the entire ecosystem and ultimately the consumer, ensuring that in the race to the bottom, the product itself doesn't suffer to the point of becoming unsafe or unreliable.
So the goal isn't to stop competition altogether, that would make sense. It's more about making it fair and preventing it from becoming destructive.
Okay, precisely. Zhu Mingyan, the other legal expert, highlights that the root cause of the current price war is a distorted competition mechanism, not competition itself. Examples of these distortions include companies selling at a loss just to grab market share, or shifting cash flow pressure unfairly onto their supply chain through dominant positions, and maybe even improper local government intervention like subsidies that prop up inefficient players, making market competition inefficient. Simply opposing competition without correcting these fundamental distortions would only complicate the problem and likely create new ones down the road. Encouragingly, though, unfair competition correction mechanisms are starting to take effect. For instance, the Fair Competition Review Regulations, which became effective on August 1st, 2024, explicitly prohibit local governments from offering selective financial rewards or subsidies to specific businesses or from facilitating monopolistic behaviors. This is a crucial step towards leveling the playing field and preventing localized distortions that can fuel these damaging price wars.
Okay, beyond regulations and legal frameworks, what role does the industry itself play in healing and finding a healthier path forward? Is there a self-correcting mechanism they can rely on, or does it all have to come from outside?
Industry self-purification, primarily through mergers and acquisitions, M&A is identified by many sources as a vital method, a key internal mechanism. Wang Xie from CAM describes this involution as an inevitable pain of transformation, but also acknowledges it as a killer for sustainable development. It has to be overcome. In this context, M&A is seen as both a natural outcome of intense competition, weaker players get bought out, and also a key solution to the problem of fragmentation and overcapacity. The MIT, the ministry, has also explicitly noted that there are simply too many small and fragmented NEV companies in China right now. They believe actively encouraging M&A is crucial for companies to grow stronger, larger, and more resilient on the global stage. It's about creating national champions, perhaps.
Are there historical precedents for this kind of consolidation in the automotive industry? Examples that China can look to for guidance or maybe lessons learned?
Oh, absolutely. If we look at Europe, the birthplace of modern automobiles, we've seen multiple profound M&A waves over the decades that completely reshaped the industry. These waves drove globalization and technological integration. For example, think about the Volkswagen Group. They rapidly expanded their footprint in Europe in the late 20th century by acquiring Skoda, which helped them fill the mid to low-end market segment. They bought Seat, strengthening their presence in Southern Europe. They also strategically acquired luxury brands like Lamborghini through their Audi subsidiary and ultimately gained control of Bentley. This clearly shows how M&A can be used strategically to expand market reach, diversify product portfolios, share platforms, and consolidate power. However, it's important to remember it's not always smooth sailing. Integrating different company cultures, technologies, and manufacturing processes after an M&A can be incredibly complex and often takes years to fully realize the intended synergies. It's not a magic bullet.
So what are the specific benefits of M&A for the Chinese auto industry right now in its current predicament? How does it directly address the problems of involution and overcapacity that we've discussed?
The benefits are multifaceted and seem to directly address the involution problem. Firstly, M&A allows whole vehicle manufacturers to share massive R&D costs, which are huge in the EV and smart car space.
Mhm.
Stellantis, the group formed by PSA and Fiat Chrysler, reportedly saves 5 billion euros annually just by sharing its EMP2 platform across multiple brands like Peugeot, Citroën, and Jeep. That's huge savings. M&A also significantly enhances bargaining power with suppliers. A larger entity gets better deals, reducing procurement costs for essential high-volume components like tires and computer chips. Secondly, M&A can directly absorb excess production capacity. After the 2008 financial crisis, for example, General Motors sold its struggling European brand Opel to PSA Group. PSA then integrated factories, rationalized production, and successfully reduced idle capacity. Thirdly, and especially relevant for China's current context with so many players, M&A enables critical resource integration, avoiding redundant investments. When weaker companies are acquired, their valuable technical patents, their R&D teams, their existing factory infrastructure, all can be absorbed and utilized by stronger entities. Zeekr's acquisition of Lynk & Co., both within the Geely ecosystem, is projected to cut R&D investment by 30% and allow for shared back-end operations in procurement, manufacturing, and marketing. That drives immense efficiency gains.
So it's really about driving efficiency and strategic growth, not just simply getting bigger for the sake of size. It sounds like a strategic way to consolidate power, resources, and ultimately profitability.
Exactly. From an economies of scale perspective, merged companies can standardize production lines across brands, expand the capacity for single popular models, and significantly lower the per unit production costs. Volkswagen, again, through integrating brands like Audi and Skoda onto common platforms like their MQB modular platform, achieved production volumes of over 30 million units on that single architecture. This reportedly cut production costs per vehicle by somewhere between 15% and 20%. Huge savings. In essence, M&A uses market mechanisms to reallocate resources more efficiently. It replaces raw, often destructive competition over existing, shrinking market share with competition based on superior efficiency, innovation, and scale. This is seen as vital to transform China's auto industry from its current state of being large but scattered to becoming truly strong and refined, capable of competing effectively not just domestically, but on the global stage.
Okay, M&A is one path. Is there another major path for Chinese auto companies to escape this domestic involuted struggle? One that looks outward instead of inward?
Yes, absolutely. The third crucial path identified in our sources is to go global, or in Chinese, the term is 出击, literally go out to sea. This means aggressively expanding into international markets, and they're already doing it. In 2024, China's auto exports reached an impressive 5.859 million vehicles. That was a 19.33% increase year on year, which is huge growth. And NEVs, the electric vehicles, accounted for over 30% of these exports. Overseas markets are rapidly becoming a core engine for revenue growth for these Chinese companies. It allows leading players to shift some of their production capacity and resources abroad. And by doing so, they can hopefully avoid the worst of the domestic price war quagmire and the intensity of the involution back home. Find new battlegrounds, essentially.
Are they finding genuinely new, perhaps less competitive opportunities overseas? Or is it simply exporting the same domestic competition to new locations?
They certainly are finding less saturated markets, particularly in certain segments. Emerging markets, especially in Southeast Asia and Latin America, are experiencing accelerated automotive consumption upgrades. People are buying more cars, better cars. And Chinese brands are quickly penetrating these regions, largely due to their strong cost-performance advantages. They offer a lot of tech for the money. For example, Chinese brands now hold a significant 65% share of Brazil's burgeoning NEV market. That's dominance. This differentiated competition entering markets where they have a distinct advantage helps them avoid the homogeneous, cutthroat involution they face domestically, where everyone looks increasingly similar. Even in more established, highly competitive markets like Europe, Chinese brands are finding breakthroughs, particularly with NEVs. Data from Jado Dynamics show that in April 2025, Chinese auto brand sales in Europe surged by a massive 121% year on year. This pushed their overall market share there from 2.4% up to 4.9% in just 1 year. That indicates clear success in finding new opportunities and a receptive audience for their combination of innovation and value proposition.
So it sounds like it's not just about shipping cars abroad anymore. It's about building an entire ecosystem outside of China, replicating their domestic success on a global scale.
This is a critical insight, yes, and our sources really emphasize this point. Chinese car companies going out is becoming much more than just exporting finished products. It's increasingly about building an entire value ecosystem overseas. Whole vehicle manufacturers setting up overseas plants like BYD in Hungary or Thailand, for example, are strategically bringing their key component suppliers with them. This creates a powerful whole vehicle plus parts collaborative effect right there in the local market. SAI Group, for instance, coordinated with over 30 of its suppliers to establish operations alongside its own CKD completely knocked down assembly plant in Indonesia. This strategically prevents domestic supply chain overconcentration back in China, and it avoids exporting the involution by diversifying their manufacturing and supply base globally. It builds resilience, and this global expansion is fundamentally reshaping the industry's entire competitive logic for these Chinese companies. It's transforming the domestic game, which is largely about price and capacity competition, often a zero-sum game, into a global competition focused on technology and brand. That's potentially a positive-sum game where innovation leads growth. This transition not only mitigates the destructive domestic involution, but also propels China's auto industry from being primarily seen as a world factory towards becoming recognized as a global innovator. As Lu Ziyil from the Chinatown Research Association notes, China's auto industry achieved massive scale in mere decades, an incredibly compressed timeline compared to the century it took in overseas markets. Now, by going global, Chinese car companies will gain a broader global perspective. They'll bring invaluable management experience, diverse market insights, and technological advancements learned abroad back to the domestic market. This, in theory, should continuously raise standards across the board, both at home and internationally. Outro.
So after all that, what does this really mean for you, our listener? We've just unpacked the intense, often unregulated price war currently gripping China's massive auto industry. We've traced its origins back a few years, seen how it's squeezing practically everyone involved, from the manufacturers and their employees working crazy hours to the suppliers facing impossible demands, and even, surprisingly perhaps, shortchanging consumers in the long run through quality concerns and service instability. We also explored the underlying root causes, especially the massive inventory buildup and systemic overcapacity that are fueling this relentless competition, and the critical role of regulators who have finally had to step in forcefully.
We've seen that this isn't just about simple market dynamics or supply and demand. It touches on complex legal issues, from potential price dumping below cost to potentially abusive supply chain practices. But importantly, we've also identified the crucial paths forward that the industry and regulators seem to be pursuing: strengthening the legal frameworks for fair competition, encouraging industry self-purification through strategic mergers and acquisitions to build stronger players, and decisively embracing global expansion to find new markets and escape the domestic pressure cooker. These are not merely survival tactics, are they? They look more like potentially transformative strategies aimed at fundamentally reshaping the industry for the better, moving it to a new stage of development.
Yeah, this deep dive really shows us that breaking free from this cycle of unregulated price wars and involuted competition feels like a pivotal turning point for China's auto industry. It's about shifting it from mere scale expansion, just getting bigger, to a much-needed quality upgrade, getting better.
Exactly. In the short term, these measures, regulation, M&A, going global, they aim to curb the alarming profit declines and begin to heal the fractured supply chain, preventing that vicious cycle where more involution just means more loss for everyone. In the midterm, the fundamental shift away from purely low-price thinking towards long-term investment in value should free up critical R&D resources. That could accelerate technological breakthroughs and transform China's automotive advantage from being primarily about cost performance, cheap and cheerful, to a more powerful and sustainable combination of technology leadership plus strong global brands.
Ultimately, the source material argues pretty strongly that China's automotive industry is now such a vital part of the global economy, it simply must move beyond the old low-price competition model. It needs to build a new competitive landscape, one driven by technology, real value for the consumer, and healthier, more ecological collaboration across the entire value chain. The hope is that it can offer a kind of China solution for the challenges facing the global auto industry's ongoing transformation towards electrification and intelligence. So as you reflect on all this, maybe consider this. In an increasingly interconnected global market, how much more might other industries, maybe even in other countries, learn from China's challenging journey right now? This struggle to escape the race to the bottom and instead pursue higher value, more innovative, and ultimately more sustainable growth. It's a fascinating case study with potentially broad lessons.